What's up, traders? Matt from the Trade Brigade here with your weekend crypto report, where as always I do a technical analysis and give you my thoughts on the coins listed up above here. This is of course for the 2 days where our beloved stock market is closed, aka the weekend. Now for a quick check-in, we are looking at the Bitcoin daily chart, then we'll drill down to the 4-hour as we typically do. What I wanted to point out was the fact that we did move, as discussed in last week's video, to the top end of the range, and again, you generally do not take the breakout here on the initial move to the top, especially when coming from the bottom. So I think it's noteworthy that we did see a pullback to a higher low, an area that we had mapped out from the previous area, and now we're starting to break back out to the upside. So I think that's healthy in terms of potentially seeing follow through this time to the upside here in the crypto space. So now let's drill down to that 4-hour and talk about tradable levels into the weekend and or next week if that's something you're interested in doing. So we've pretty much had some sideways activity. This trade here worked out phenomenally. If you took that with me in last week's video, we were looking for a retest here and potentially holding out for a piece to move up higher. Obviously, you would have stopped out somewhere back underneath the breakout point from in here, 41,000 just about per coin. But as the chart currently sits, what can we glean from this information? What can we use going forward here? Well, certainly sort of this high, this area of resistance here, the pivot, is acting as resistance now. You can see this upper wick is forming on this 4-hour candle, so that is noteworthy. My first sort of inclination here would be to see a little bit of a backing off, simply because it looks like sellers are stepping in a bit. Where should we expect some support to come into play? Well, again, it's probably around that prior breakout point. You can see prior resistance, then sort of, in the zone of offering support here, but really in more recent price history, you can see that price has acted as a magnet for consolidation and just an area where there can be two-sided trade resuming. So on any pullbacks, I'd really love to see it hold that area in a worst case scenario. Ideally, it holds these prior wicks, prior resistance, as newfound support, right? That's a fundamental piece of technical analysis, and just for numbers sake, that's right around $41,700 per coin here. In Bitcoin, we talked about 41K, nice round number. That's kind of the line in the sand. Anything underneath it would be more of a look above and fail pattern, in my opinion, where we've essentially tried to break out of this range here, right? So we have something like that. We have a look above, and when we fail back underneath 41,000, we always know the target would be the bottom end of the range. In this case, it's $37,000 and $800,000. It's always interesting flipping from stocks to something that's now priced in the tens of thousands of dollars. So that's the ultimate downside target. Should we breach 41K, it would take us back into the range for a look above and fail. Obviously, on a hold of 41.7 and or 41,000 even, we're looking for that to be a higher low pullback and then continue. So we would need to take out this high closer to 44,000 to then make it up towards our target from the daily, which we discussed in length in last week's video, up around that 45,000 mark. Obviously, this trend line is no longer in play, so let's clean up the chart by doing something like that. It makes it a little easier on the eyes. Litecoin is up next, and again, this one looks very similar to what we just saw in Bitcoin, simply with the inverted hammer up there towards the top end of this range. You can see that we've respected here, came down, respected, back up at the top. With the inverted hammer, you have to start questioning, okay, is it time to fade back down into the range? Do we need some more consolidation here? So not overwhelmingly bullish about this breakout up and over the 148 mark here in Litecoin. I'd really be watching for a higher low pullback. So to me, that would want to respect something like I would argue it's this level here at 144.40, simply because we had prior resistance, and then once broken, sort of offered some support here before this most recent leg up. And also in terms of preserving this 4-hour uptrend, we could do something like this, form a higher low, right? So we would have low in here, that would be big L, and this of course would be an HL for higher low, continuing and preserving again this 4-hour uptrend. Obviously, after that, you would need a new higher high, but that's sort of the next leg, if you will. Let's go ahead and remove that support trend line, again, no longer really in play, and just sort of looking left, kind of map out a target. Since we are starting to breach some of these important prior areas of resistance, I would argue the next target to the upside should be based on prior support and resistance. So you can see these lower wicks interacting here, lower wicks, and more importantly, the reason I chose this instead of going right directly to these lows in here is because in more recent price history, we also see it acting as resistance there. That's close up to 154.21, we'll call it. And just scrolling back over, again, that's a reasonable move that could potentially happen over the course of the weekend. So that would be your upside target. I would cap it off there. Next up, we'll move on over to Ethereum. This one still has the support trend line in play. Sure, it wasn't as clean of a hold back here in this little consolidation underneath, but we are back above. You can see we've respected it here on this touch, and now we're doing something like this. So the trend is your friend. Obviously, we're going to still favor upside movement here in Ethereum, and we need to look left for more reasonable areas of support and resistance to really pay attention to. So just scrunching the chart up and just kind of remembering where price was in the past, I would argue these top, upper wicks in here looks like a bit of a triple top, and we're kind of trying to resolve it right now. So let's zoom in, see what that candle structure is looking like. Again, with Bitcoin showing that upper wick, Litecoin the upper wick as well. No surprise that Ethereum is kind of following suit here. So my initial reaction would be, yes, look for a little bit of resistance to come into play, a little bit of sell side activity. If we do pull back, that's the area that you want to hold. Again, simply remembering technical principles, prior resistance, then offering support here to put a nice round number to it. Let's go ahead and throw on a level that's at 2730. Okay, so keep that in mind here as a pullback buy on Ethereum should we get down and into it, considering that we did make a new higher high here. It's not like we made a lower high and we're coming back down to revisit support, so that strikes me as being bullish. Again, support trend lines kind of in play, so maybe a pullback coinciding, something that would look like that. Buy here for super support, stop goes just underneath, and you're looking for trend continuation to go higher here inside of Ethereum. Again, a target above those triple peaks in there, the triple top, if you will. Let's zoom this out slightly, see what we're working with. So you could be very granular or not so granular. I would argue that that is a pretty picky area there around 2970. After that, you'd probably be just looking at 3000 round number, and then after, you can see prior support shelf in here really up towards 3210, we'll call it, was a much more significant area where we saw lower wick stacking, and once broken, the selling really got going to the downside. So that's more of an upside target should there be any major continuation higher here in Ethereum. But again, looking at this chart and how it sits, with Bitcoin seeing that upper wick forming, I wouldn't be surprised to see a pullback before seeing upside continuation to those levels that we just discussed. Next up, we'll check in on ADA for Cardano, of course, and this one is actually ready for a support trend line, I would imagine. It just, it looks better to me now than it did earlier. I can do something like this and use that as an anchor point, something like that. And you can see, so here's anchor, here's touch number one on this deeper pullback here. You could argue also that there's something like this. We map out from here to here, that's a bit of a tighter fit, but of course there was that bit of fake breakdown right here, recaptured back to the upside. So, depending on how clean or not clean you want your charts to look, you could either keep both on or just simply one. If you only had to choose one, I would focus more on this one right here. We are starting to clear a major area of resistance here at 1.375, and that would lead me to be, slightly more bullish on this, considering how it was a double top from in the past, touches in here. So our next target is simply right up above into these highs, up around 1.4492. And, again, just like sort of echoing myself here, this upper wick would indicate to me that there is some selling pressure up here. I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of pullback happen. The higher low should happen around this area of support, which we've noted at 1.375. And from there, take out the high to move up towards that 1.4492 target to the upside. So again, trend is your friend here. Until this support trend line breaks, I would argue that you need to remain bullish on Cardano into the future. Next up, we have Doge, the almighty Doge here, the coin of the people, for the people, if you will, depending on what type of person you are, of course, and just sort of checking it out. This one's not really impressive. It's not really doing and following along with the rest of the crypto market, and we know that's fine. It's just going to do what it's going to do. I would argue that it's in the middle of a range. Remember that when we're in the middle of any given range, it's not generally advised that you initiate a new position here. It's kind of a 50-50 shot that you move towards the top or back down towards the bottom. So as it sits right now, not going to advise any type of position. We know that we have support and sort of chop around this 20-cent mark. You can see all these prior upper wicks stacking in this area. If it's revisited, it should, from a technical perspective, offer some sort of support. But again, with something more memey, quote unquote, if you will, I'm not entirely sure that will be the case. So support underneath has to hold here at 19 or 0.1963 if we want to get really granular here with the fractions of the penny. To the upside, if we get to the top of the range, be aware of resistance at 0.2107, and after that, I'd argue there is this high in here to contend with. Let's go ahead and just put a level to it so we're aware if there is any sort of breakout up around 0.2176. So Doge, not really looking like there's a good trade idea here in this name. Next up, we have Ripple, XRP, of course. Again, we did break the support trend line, so let's go ahead and get rid of that for this one, and we'll also do the same thing. We're trading in some type of range that would look like this, and where do we sit in comparison to the 50% mark? Slightly above, but I would argue it's still in the middle middle of the overall range. It's not clear to me whether or not we make it all the way to the top or come back down to the bottom. Generally, the opportunity really arises when you're trading in a sideways range to either fade the highs back down towards the middle or take the breakout higher, and the same but opposite, of course, if you're down below at the bottom of the range. So not really seeing a whole lot of compelling trade idea here in XRP. Just know that we have that overhead resistance, which is going to be right around our 0.7681. Okay, so keep that in mind to the upside. Ideally, again, just like Doge, we would hold on to some of these wicks as prior resistance turns into support here, close to 0.7377. Last but not least, we have XLM for Stellar, and let's see if this chart is stellar or not. And I would argue it's kind of in the same boat as the last three that we sort of talked about here, not really showing a whole lot of relative strength like Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum. But for now, you could argue there is a support trend line in play, something that looks like this. If we pull back into it, it could offer some sort of buying opportunity. You can, very clearly see that our lows are continually getting higher and higher from this 4-hour perspective. All we need to do now is really get clean acceptance over the top of 0.2823. If we can do that, I would argue a breakout should take us up to at least this prior high from in here, because we are in an uptrend, right? So we should be trying to set new higher highs. So to me, it would make sense that we revisit the last high, and that area is going to be right around 0.3 flat, right? So it's a very psychological number as well, should act as a nice target and resistance. Little bump in the road at 0.2921, and that's kind of going to cap us off on the upside. Again, upper wick is forming here. I do think it's interesting that there's a lot of volume coming in as we're trying to break this. So keep in mind, if we do get the break, volume should really flow in. You should see a lot of power backing this move to the upside to have true confidence in any sort of breakout that really gets going and underway. So that's going to wrap up this week's episode of the Crypto Report. If you enjoyed the video or learned anything new, let me know down below in the comments section, or by simply leaving the video a thumbs up. Don't forget the weekly watch list comes out on Sunday covering stocks and options, so definitely tune into that. And that being said, we wish you a green trading weekend.